Remember the song from the play Oliver? Food, glorious food. So not much has changed in the history of the world. We love our food. And as I mentioned at the beginning of Mass, today and for the next 3 Sundays, the scripture, the gospel, will be taken from the 6th chapter of the Gospel of John, where Jesus is presented as the bread of life. In today's gospel, we hear how Jesus saw the crowd with compassion and responded with this wonderful miracle of the multiplication of the loaves. The next Sunday, the focus will narrow to focus more on Jesus as the bread of life himself. And then the following 2 weeks on the mystery of the Eucharist, that we receive Jesus in Holy Communion. But some contrasts are probably important. Think about if you lived 2,000 years ago. I'm not even sure there were restaurants, but there were probably hostels. And so you go in and you wait for the menu to be presented. After, of course, the servant girl welcomes you and tells you that her name is Denise, and she's going to be your server, right? And finally, nothing happens, and so you get impatient, and you ask for the menu. I don't know what you're talking about. Do you want to eat? Okay, this is what we're having today. Happens to be what we had yesterday on the menu and what we'll probably have tomorrow on the menu. The point being, you and I live in a world of great options in terms of food. Plus, 2,000 years ago and still today, sadly, in many parts of the world, people lived from day to day, meal to meal. We have freezers. We go shopping, some of us, is the least often as we absolutely have to, okay? But I remember even in 1980 being in Jerusalem, and we had to go to the market every day, because they didn't have that kind of possibility of preserving food. Food means very different things to us. We hear sometimes, maybe we'll even say it, but certainly children will say it. For some of you, your grandchildren will say it. I'm starving. Well, not really. I'm not even sure they had 3 meals a day in those days, in the olden days, or even again in many parts of the world today. So we live in a very different context about food. Food is something we just depend on. It's going to be there. And for us of the weaker sex, we usually think somebody's going to be there to prepare it for us too. Maybe not. But think about that, to live from day to day. So these people who were spending their time with Jesus in this deserted place, they didn't have their little coolers with them, anything like that. No, they weren't sure where their next meal was going to come from. Big contrast. And notice kind of some biblical allusions that the scriptures in some ways always, while moving us forward to look at the mystery of the Eucharist, are also taking us back. And here the obvious connection is with the Israelites who moved during the Passover, were rescued by God from being slaves in Egypt to free people. But they weren't too long out of Egypt before, like us, they began to grumble, complain. Why did you bring us out here? We would have preferred the good old cucumbers of Cairo than out here without anything to eat. And so Moses prayed to God, and God gave them manna, bread in the desert. And so we see, in a sense, Jesus ascends the mountain. He gets as close to God as physically we could get, I guess. And he assumes the role of the new Moses. He sees the people in their hunger, and he's going to respond. And there's other allusions in this passage. We're told that he had people sit down on the green grass. Well, if you've ever been to Israel, for one, there's not a lot of green grass, period. But what does that hearken to? Last Sunday's psalm response. The Lord is my shepherd. He leads me in green pastures and has me lie down near restful waters. Again, the illusion, God is taking care of us. God is providing for his people. Abraham Maslow, a famous psychologist of the last century, talked about, in a sense, we have a hierarchy of needs, or maybe today I'll call it a hierarchy of hungers. Our first care and concern is always our survival, Some people, that's their issue every day. And for other people, and this does touch on us today, it's about safety. Will we be safe? I heard people recently say, I don't go downtown Chicago anymore. It's not safe. I've been there. It's okay. There are some problems, but it's hardly Beirut or somewhere like that. So safety is something we're concerned about. And then we worry about belonging. Will I be included? Will I be part or apart? And then we look for meaning. That usually comes from being in community, loving relationship. So we have a whole hierarchy of hungers that are, in a sense, more sophisticated than, on some level, those people following Jesus into this deserted place and realizing the hour is late and there's no food. Okay. But here's a different take on this gospel. We see two very different responses. Okay. One, we know very well. I would call it our ordinary consciousness. And the other is a spiritual consciousness that Jesus is trying to teach us, lead us into. So what's the ordinary consciousness? Well, that we think life is all about division, dividing, okay? So if there's 5,000 people and there's 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, as we say to one another, do the math. And what do? We divide. And we say, it's impossible. There's not enough. And that leads to a whole mentality that unfortunately oftentimes afflicts us. Scarcity. There's not enough. So think back just a year ago or so, you couldn't find paper products, Kleenex, paper towels, TP. Why? Okay? Because we thought there wasn't going to be enough, and so what did some of us do? Well, we hoard it. And we do that on all sorts of levels. That's our ordinary consciousness, but it's far away from a spiritual consciousness or the consciousness of Jesus. And so where we normally go is division. And where do the scriptures take us? Notice, Jesus takes a little, and all of a sudden, there's an abundance. There's more than enough. There are leftovers, 12 baskets, we're told. The spiritual consciousness is one of multiplication. And if we could actually adapt that spiritual consciousness to our lives and to our world, and we do to some extent, think what a different world we would live in. there would be no hunger, there would be no poverty, because there's enough. Think of it, the tremendous work that's been done for years and years and years in this parish through sharing. What's that about? It's about ensuring that there's always enough. And so I don't know anybody in this parish who ever told me they're going broke because of the sharing program. No, it doesn't work that way. We take what we really don't need, and we're not going to miss, we give it away. Two very different orientations about life, and we choose them. Am I going to hold on for dear life? Am I going to protect what I have and make sure nobody else gets it? Or am I going to share? Am I going to share? I used to know a wonderful African-American woman from St. James Parish, Beatrice Williams. And sometimes she would invite me over for dinner, and I said, well, it's late in the day. Do you have enough? And she'd always say, don't be silly. There's always enough for one more at my table. A spiritual consciousness of abundance. All is given to us, not to me, to us, and it's meant to be shared. So in today's gospel, Jesus is trying to bring us to a new way of not only looking at the world, but acting. There's always enough. And so we don't need to fear, we just need to be grateful and share.
Thank you for joining us for this celebration of the Mass. This virtual Mass is broadcast to hundreds of people every day of the week. You know, over 100 years ago, the very first celebrations of the Mass took place on the second floor of the Glenview Public House. It's been inconceivable that 100 years later, we would be reaching so many people all over the world through this technology. If you'd like to support the ongoing broadcasts of OLPH's Masses, please go to our website, go to Give Central, and you'd be able to support the ongoing outreach of this virtual ministry. Thank you for your support. Most of all, thank you for joining us in prayer. God bless you.